SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. DEI, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. It's in the spotlight with diverse opinions on the issue. With the United States moving to abolish these programs, do you think Australia should follow suit? Well, the Vice President of Research and Advisory for Gartner, McEwen, says corporate Australia remains committed to DEI and is likely to continue diversifying their workforces. Aaron explains why he believes small business owners should see diversity as a competitive advantage. And as he explains to Jeff Waters, the political landscape in the US is very different from here in Australia.
It's a complex one to answer. So firstly, it's nothing new. We've been tracking, the build-up of what we would refer to as anti-DEI or anti-woke sentiment for the best part of 2 years now. So it has been kind of building in the background. I think it's part of a broader trend, which is kind of around the culture wars that we see being, waged across the political spectrum all around the world. But we've certainly seen data that reflects a growing anti-DEI sentiment, even amongst employees. So there's kind of lots of components to this. And of course, with the election of Trump and the executive orders that have been coming out of the White House administration, it's obviously accelerated this issue, supercharged it and put it right on the agenda. As for the Australian context, we are certainly seeing indications, I think particularly within the political environment, given that we're coming up to another election cycle. There's probably some, election clout that can be derived from this debate and what we're seeing happen in the US. But I wouldn't expect that we will see the same impact here in Australia. And there's a couple of factors behind that. Firstly, corporate Australia appears to be quite committed to continuing their efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are certainly regulatory and legal structures in place that will ensure that organisations still need to report on their progress. So I think the Australian context is very different to the US. We don't have quite the level of political polarisation and fragmentation here. I think there's a foundational component of our culture which is very aligned to equity and giving people a fair go, and a sense of rooting for the underdog, I think are all components of Australia's cultural milieu. So that kind of combination of factors, regulatory, legal, a commitment from corporate leaders, a recognition that the data certainly supports the positive impact that diversity, equity, and inclusion can have on organisational results and financial performance and all of the rest. Combined with that background cultural milieu, I think suggests that Australia won't quite go down the same direction that the US is going.
Before we talk about regulation, could you just tell us why it is that you think that DEI is advantageous in business?
Well, there's some clear research that suggests, particularly when we think about diversity, so that could be diversity of background, or it could be diversity of perspective. And what that tends to do, particularly at the board level or the senior executive level for an organization, is that it creates better decision making. And it also leads to higher levels of innovation. There's a whole bunch of other positive impacts, but I think if we got down to, where does the dollar stop, so to speak, it directly aligns with what organizations are trying to do. And that is that they want to grow, they want to innovate, they want to be more agile. So when you have a diversity of perspectives throughout the organization, but particularly at the top of the organization, it tends to lead to better decisions in the long run.
Presumably with the fact that it's regulation here in Australia means that it would take legislation to change it, which means we'd have to have a huge debate first. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, we have checks and balances within our governmental system. So, even if a political candidate were to, I guess, platform on the basis of a kind of ideological shift and a populist wave, it's not a straightforward kind of slam dunk in the sense of Australia really doesn't have a version of executive orders that can bypass parliamentary oversight and a whole range of other things. So there are checks and balances. And again, I think I would say that, we have a compulsory voting system in Australia, and that tends to protect us a little bit from extreme perspectives in government.
A lot of small business owners might be listening and thinking, well, this is ridiculous. It might be a great benefit to large business, as a big business, as you have discussed, but this is not something that I should be taking part in. What would you say to them?
I mean, I can understand the sentiment. I think small businesses, certainly the ones that I know and interact with, part of why they run their own business is so that they can be the boss.
Make their own decisions.
Absolutely. And so I think, whenever decision making is restricted for whatever reason, there's probably a sense of, well, just get out of my way so I can get on with doing what I want to do. I'm a psychologist by background, though. And one of the things we do know is that we like to build our empires in our own image. And so I think there's actually a very significant risk for small business owners when they're not exposed to different perspectives, when they're not exposed to seeing an issue from multiple different angles and perspectives. I won't dive into the success rate of small businesses after the 12 to 24 month period, but I do often wonder whether that failure rate comes down to poor decisions. And so if those business owners were guided by more perspectives, perhaps that failure rate wouldn't be quite as high. So, on one hand, I get it and I understand it, and I'm certainly, I wouldn't call myself a control freak, but, I like to have my own agency. However, I've also learnt that when you surround yourself with good people that have different views to you, it makes you a better leader and a better decision maker.
Also, would it not have an effect, a positive effect on the customers?
Absolutely. And I think this is the single most overlooked perspective when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that most businesses sell to the public. And the public here in Australia or globally is very diverse. And so if you cannot sell your product or your service in a way that appeals to your customer base, however diverse that might be, that's going to create challenges for you.
That's Erin McEwen, Vice President of Research and Advisory for Gartner. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schildberger, Jeff Waters and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more Be Daily next week.